everyone, and welcome to this month's live event. So if you'll notice, something a little bit different is happening this time. This is the first time in years of doing these live events together that we're actually in the same room at our National Sewing Circle headquarters here in Minnesota. So Nicki, thank you so much for being here.
I am so glad to finally be here with you in the flesh.
Yes. All right. So of course, as always, if you have any of your sewing questions that you'd like Nicki to answer over the next hour, go ahead and enter those, and you can enter them into the large green chat boxes under the video. So go ahead and just type in any questions that you want her to answer, and we'll work through those for the next hour. We're going to start off with some pre-submitted comments and questions that we have. And the first one here, this is from Jackie, and she says, I want to thank you both for what you do on these live events. Your help, guidance, and ideas are much appreciated, and I usually learn something new every time I watch. So thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, Jackie. That's very nice.
Yes. All right. And our next question here, Mary wants to know, can you explain how to make leggings without a pattern?
Yes. So if you want to make a pair of leggings, but you don't have a pattern, you can take a pair of leggings that you already have and lay them out, fold them so that you get, you know, the
one leg worth.
One leg.
Yeah.
And you can trace it off, trace right next to, right along the edge of those leggings, and then add yourself in a little seam allowance, like a 1/4 inch is probably enough if you're using a knit fabric for your knit leggings. And get yourself knit fabric that's got a similar amount of stretch as the leggings that you are copying, so that you know you're going to have enough stretch to put them on over your body.
Yep.
And trace off the pattern from something you already have, and yeah, you should have wherever you have seams on the leggings, make sure you have seams, you know, a different pattern piece for each piece of the legging.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Totally, it does definitely make sense. So if you think about, like I'm thinking about, you know, you're doing your laundry, you're folding your pair of pants in half, right? So you have a fold in your pants. Wherever there's a fold in the pants, you have to put that fold on a fold in your fabric, right? So you're getting 2 pieces, or would you have to?
That's why I was thinking about it as I was talking. I think you might end up with just two pieces. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so when you said whenever there's a seam allowance, how much would you add for hems and waistbands and things like that?
So for a waistband, if you are doing like an elastic casing in your waistband, you want to add enough for the width of that elastic plus like 1/2 inch to get that fold under as you fold over for the elastic width and then fold that under.
Yep.
So however much for the elastic that you're using, and then a little bit extra. And then for the hem, it can be whatever you kind of want to use.
Yeah.
For a knit legging, like a 1/2 inch to 1 inch, it's probably fine. Finish it off with a zigzag stitch so you get stretch in that ankle seam at the bottom.
Perfect. So this is how you do it with leggings, but then you can essentially do this with any clothing article you want, right? I mean, I know I'm going to sort of preview something I know that she is going to be filming for us later this afternoon that will be available on the site soon, but you're doing this with another article of clothing, right?
Yes, so I'm going to do a tank top. So I'm going to show you how to trace off a tank top pattern from your closet, something that you already know fits you well and you like the cut of. So I'm going to demo how to trace off that pattern, and you can do it with anything. You can do it with t-shirts, you can do it with dresses, whatever you've got in your closet. Just lay it out on your pattern paper and trace around the edges and the seams, and you can create a whole new wardrobe for yourself, essentially.
Perfect. All right, we have another question here that goes along with wardrobe, so I want to fit this one in next. But Anna says that she likes to alter a lot of family clothing or thrifted clothing. She says, being a newbie, is there any direction on what to tackle first when tailoring? For example, if you have something like a pair of pants and both the waist is too big and the legs are too big, what do you tackle first?
So first, if you're doing a adjustment to the legs and the waistband, I would do the legs first, because that leg seam, you can take in the leg seam at the side seam all the way up and then finish off that waist seam if you're like taking the waist down or something. So if a seam intersects with another seam, you have to kind of deconstruct it in your mind to figure out what the sequence of operations has to be, what has to go first in order to make the most sense. So yeah, that would be taking it in at the side seam of the legs and then going and fixing that waistband. Yeah.
All right, now follow up with the waistband. It says the waistband is covered inside and outside and has top stitching. So do I just take it in from the sides, or do I have to take it in at the back seam, or where do you get into the waistband at?
So if you're taking in the waistband,
Yes.
It depends on how you want to do it, I think. So if you want to take the elastic, actually like take the elastic in, you'd want to go in at a seam and pull at the elastic and, you know, trim it off to make that tighter. Or if you wanted to, you could just go in at the side seams and zip it up, you know, take those seams in, just pinch out as much as you want out of that waistband from each side seam and just take a seam there, and that could work. It would be more finished if you unpicked the seam and took it out and finished everything.
Right.
But for a quick fix, just taking it in at the side seams also works.
Yeah. I'm definitely all about quick fixes, and especially since our example was pajama pants, like definitely on a pair of pajama pants or something like that, I'm going to go for a quick fix versus a pair of slacks or something that you're really worried about. You know, you're gonna have a shirt tucked into it and you need everything to look super nice. So definitely prioritize how much time you put into something, into like how often you're gonna wear the garment, how nice it is, all of that stuff, yes.
For sure.
All right, so that's some questions on garments. I wanna say if you are someone who is new to maybe a new sewing machine or something like that and would like some information on a sewing machine, you can actually download, we have a free Ultimate Sewing Machine Guide that you can download right now. It has tips for buying a machine, setting it up, using it, maintaining your sewing machine, which I know is something that we get lots of questions on, is how to keep your sewing machine running and operating smoothly. So there's a banner below the video playing right now that you can click on it, and if you're watching on Facebook, there's a link in the description. So be sure to download that if you have any issues, questions, or want to know more about your sewing machine. So Ultimate Sewing Machine Guide. All right, next question here from Anna. She says, I also alter a lot of jeans, which nowadays has some spandex. Do I use a jeans needle or a stretch needle, and how do I know when to use one or the other?
So when jeans do have some spandex in them, I think it would still be fine to use a jeans needle. It depends on the thickness of your fabric and what you need, because the jeans needle is designed to go through a lot of layers of that thick, tight twill weave that, you know, denim jeans are known for. But a lot of the jeans that are made with spandex are thinner nowadays, so you don't necessarily need a jeans needle. So you could use a spandex needle, but there is the spandex, the concentration of spandex, I guess, the percentage of spandex in jeans is not super high. They have some spandex to give it a little bit of stretch, but it's not like you're sewing on 100% spandex material, which is what the spandex needle is made for.
Okay.
So with jeans that have spandex in them, I think even a universal needle would probably be fine, because it's thin enough for that universal needle to go through, but the spandex percentage isn't high enough to require a spandex needle.
Okay, makes sense. So then what if you have, let's not necessarily use the stretchy jean combination anymore, but if you have just two different fabrics that you're sewing together, like I have a satin dress and I'm adding knit lace or something onto it. I don't know, just two totally different fabrics. How do you pick which needle to use when you have two fabrics?
Yeah, so you have to think about what fabric requires the most care. So if you're stitching knit fabric onto woven fabric, I would use a ballpoint needle in that situation, because you can use a ballpoint needle to stitch wovens, but when you stitch knit with a universal needle, it'll work, but though that ballpoint needle is designed for use on knits to not damage the construction of that knit fabric and extend the life of the knit fabric. So yeah, think about the consequences of using the needle, which type of needle on which type of fabric, and the fabric that requires the most delicate care. You know, use the needle specific for that fabric.
Right,
I
perfect.
guess.
All right, so say you didn't, say you didn't use the right needle and you're stitching on something, again, like a satin dress, and you're using a needle that either is too dull or is just the wrong kind of needle, and you get a run or a snag. Like, how do you repair, and what can you repair versus have to start over and get new fabric?
So if you get a snag or a run in something like satin, you can't really put a run back, you know, right. You can't really rethread it. So if you take that up a little bit, so if you get a run along your seam line, you could move that seam line up a skosh, and that would hide that run in the seam. So that's one option. I guess it all depends on where it's happening and how you can hide it, but that's one way to do it.
Okay, perfect. All right, our next question here, Bertha wants to know, where can I find skirt patterns?
Skirt patterns, you can find skirt patterns all over the place. So in addition to like the big companies, McCall, Simplicity, Quick Sew, Vogue patterns that you can find at Joann Fabrics and fabric stores all over the place, there are a million like indie pattern companies that are popping up, which are really great. I love those because the instructions that they write seem to be a little bit easier to follow. I think than, you know,
than Vogue maybe.
Yeah,
so big. Yeah. Well, just a little interjection. I don't want anyone to think that I'm talking about Vogue patterns, but there is. I'm definitely not. But like, there is a level of. They're definitely advanced patterns, and like there's certain pattern names that you associate with. Okay, these are going to be complex instructions, and Vogue is definitely one of those. And then you have sort of middle of the road, which is what I call like the Butterick patterns, and Berta patterns, and then Simplicity and McCall's I would say would be easy. So those are our 3 rankings. So where do these indie ones fit?
I think they're designed a lot for beginners, which is really great. They make the instructions really easy to follow, and they have great resources online as well. So look for those at your fabric stores, or you can find a lot of them online as well. And online sewing patterns are becoming a real big thing. Downloading sewing patterns from home and printing them off on your home printer and taping them together. So there are, if you type into your search bar exactly what you're looking for, like A-line skirt pattern or maxi skirt pattern for knit fabrics or something, you can get as specific as you want, and you can find a lot of different resources and, you know, click around and shop around, and the internet is a wonderful place.
Yes, absolutely. So this is something I know we've talked about this in the past when we've addressed it a couple different times, but so when you're buying a pattern at, say, your local fabric store, wherever you're getting it, you come home and you unfold these really big pattern sheets, right? When you're getting a pattern online, you don't have that. You obviously have to print off your pattern piece. So how do you ensure that the size you want is the size that you're printing?
So a lot of times when you download a pattern that you're going to print at home, they'll have instructions, which is really great because different pattern companies sometimes do it differently, and you have to set your printer to print at, you know, 100% scale or no tiling, or depending on what software you have and the pattern company, it might be different. But most of the time, the pattern companies include a test square somewhere on the pattern. So when you start printing it out, measure that test square. It'll say a 1-inch test square or whatever. So measure that when you print it to make sure it's printing out at the right scale, and then you know that the rest of the pattern is to the correct scale.
Perfect.
And they'll have little crosshairs on the corners for you to match up the sheets of your 8.5 by 11-inch sheets, to match up those crosshairs and tape together, and make sure you tape the pieces really well together, and then cut out the size that you need, and it'll act like just any other pattern.
Perfect. All right, our next one here, Robin wants to know, do you have any suggestions for easy projects my kids can make?
Yes. Teaching kids to sew is really fun, but you definitely want to start with easy projects so that they can get the hang of it and don't get frustrated.
Yes.
So projects like pillowcase, something where they can choose their own fabrics. They can choose some, fun fabrics and then use the pillowcase that night. It's fun for them to do. A pillowcase is easy because, it's a rectangle. You can just sew quick and easy seams. Little things like like a little tote bag or something, something that they can use. And it doesn't have to be anything like lined or anything. If it's for a kid, you can just, you know, finish the seam allowances with a zigzag stitch on the inside and, you know, give it to them to play with.
Right.
A little scarf would be something fun too. Straight seams, you know, just a couple of rectangles. And it all depends on the level of sewing that your kid is at. So if you're just starting out, easy projects like that are good, and then you can graduate to bigger things like little plushies. You know, you can make them a little stuffed animal with felt fabric and stuff it. And, my daughter helped me make, I did a campfire, so I got red, orange, and yellow felt, and I cut out the flames and put them back to back, and then stuffed them, and I did 3 of those flames and kind of stitched them together at the edges, and then I made little logs so we could have a little campfire in the living room.
Was it just for fun? Just for
Yeah.
Well, perfect. I like that.
It was like winter, and she
Yeah.
was excited to go camping. So it's like, here, we can have a.
I think that's perfect. So your daughter's 5, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the level she's at. So my son is 2, so we're not quite there yet, but he does know on my machine to wind the bobbin, you just have to pull down a little lever and then hit the go button. And so he knows how to pull down the lever and hit the go button. He can do that whether there's a bobbin ready to be wound or not. He does that all the time. So we've got that down. So I have a little bobbin winder in training, and then we'll get towards the actual sewing part.
They're very helpful, aren't they?
Yeah, very much. All right, next one here. Julie says, "Hi ladies, I have a spool of thread that I love, but it is rather old and has become brittle. It breaks very easily. Is there any way I can save this, or should I just throw it away?"
Yes, so this is something we probably have mentioned before, the Sewer's Aid.
Yes.
It's a little bottle of like thread conditioner, I guess. It definitely looks like the bottle of Fray Check, so keep those separate.
So I think the only difference, and the ones that I bought, is Fray Check comes in like a white bottle with a blue lid, and I think Sewer's Aid is a blue bottle with a blue lid. The ones I've purchased. I mean, there could be other colors of bottles too, but
yeah, that Sewer's Aid, you just put a line. It's like a little viscous liquid. Throw a line down your spool of thread, and it helps strengthen your thread.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about putting too much. Like it even will tell you, like you said, just one line of it, and then as your thread unspools, it kind of like sinks into it and gets into the other layers. And then, I mean, if you have sewn, like I don't want you to sit there and count the revolutions of thread that come off your spool, but I mean, if you've sewn like a pretty big project and you know that you've gone down a significant amount on your thread spool, go ahead and just add a little bit more, like every now and then. Yeah, absolutely. All right, next one here, it says, "I am super new to sewing and have a bit of a dumb question, but what exactly are sewing notions? I've been hearing this term used a lot."
Yes, well, there are no dumb questions.
No.
Send all of your questions. So notions are just tools. Tools that you use for sewing. So anything from zippers, buttons, seam rippers, whatever, things that you need for sewing are sewing notions. I don't know where that word came from or why we use it, but that is the word that is used.
So this is a funny little backstory, because I know my mom is watching because she's watched every single live event ever. So I know
Thank
this
you,
is
Jackie.
Yes, she always watches. But so I know we've had this conversation before, because for me, I have the same definition of notions. Like I think of anything you use, and so I include my scissors and seam rippers, and she doesn't. And like she thinks of notions for her are, if you look at the back of a pattern envelope, and it tells you notions, it's only talking about zippers, buttons, specialty threads, like those extra
things.
Yeah, like the stuff that's actually physically on the garment, not what you use to put it on. And her other like yes, I'm right, you're wrong kind of thing is that when you go to Joann's and try to use a notions coupon, they won't let you buy scissors.
Oh. So Joann's definition of notions is
I think that's got to be. I'm sure.
Well, one of those definitions
So
is
definitely
notion.
for sure, you know, buttons and scissors, or buttons and zippers and those kind of things are notions. Yes, for sure. All right. Sabrina wants to know, do you have any good tips for cutting felt smoothly?
So for cutting anything smoothly, I use a rotary cutter because you get one long continuous cut, and you don't have to, with your scissors, you know you have to, to get it all in a line, you're moving your scissors, and the cut can get a little bit jagged. So rotary cutter, for sure.
Yeah. If you don't have a rotary cutter and you only have your scissors, do you have any tips for using your scissors?
I guess it would just be very careful and make sure that when you go to make another cut, that you go all the way to the end of your first cut and make sure it aligns.
Yep, absolutely.
Just very carefully.
Perfect. All right, our next one here, somebody wants to know if you can show, you might not be able to show, but maybe you can explain a little bit, but how to adjust patterns, especially things like blouses and sleeves.
How to adjust to them. So that all depends on what adjustment you're doing. So there's a huge variety of pattern alterations that you can do. But when you're, so is it on a pattern or on a garment?
I'm gonna say on a garment. So let's just say it's a ready-made garment already.
Okay. So for ready-made garments, if it's like a blouse and it's too big under the arms or something, you know, take it wrong side out and pin out as much as you think that you need to take in. Well, have it on yourself first and
put it on inside out.
Put it on inside out. There you go. And figure out how much you need to take out and pin it out. And then, you know, draw yourself your new side seam and stitch. You can come in from the side seam and then curve down. You want to try to follow the shape of the original garment, but taking in as much as you need to. And you definitely want to take in from each side seam. And if you need to take in a whole bunch, like if you're taking in more than like 2 or 3 inches, you want to take it in from as many places as you can. Like if there's a center back seam in the garment, that would even be a great place to take a little bit out of as well, so you're not taking an enormous chunk out of each side seam, because that can throw off the grain and throw off the drape. So balancing it around the circumference of the garment. So if you're taking out like 3 or 4 inches of circumference, divide it between the side seams, divide it. If there's another seam you can take out of, it's a good idea.
Can you add a center back seam if there isn't one already?
Absolutely. And that would be a good idea if you're taking a lot out, to just take in like a 1/2 inch of the center back or something, and then you just add a seam in the back, and it's not a huge deal.
Perfect. All right, our next one here. Any tips on making a crib sheet, or even just a sheet in general? Go with that.
Sheets. So fitted sheets?
Sure. Because flat sheets, I feel like we'll just hem some edges and we're good.
And you're good. The fitted sheet, I've never tried to make one, but you've got elastic at the edges. So I would say the easiest way is probably take a sheet that you have to copy off of, you know, how much elastic you need at the corners. But I would say, so you've got a rectangle for a sheet. You want to throw a seam in the corner. So take kind of like boxing the corner a little bit. And then cut off that excess from the seam, and then add in elastic around that edge. Seems like it would work.
And I mean, we're like 20 minutes into this and I haven't said this yet, but we have a video on National Sewing Circle. I believe Ellen March even did this for us years and years ago, and I believe it can work for any size sheet, but she did show a crib sheet size sample, so it's a smaller sheet. But yeah, she showed how to measure, so you know that you either have a large enough rectangle to cover the top and go down the sides, and then you can cut the square from it to box the corners, or she shows how to do all that and add in the elastic. So check out that video if you want more in-depth visual explanation on how to make some sheets. All right, our next one here, Danny says, I'm having a problem with my sewing machine. The thread is looping on the underside of the fabric. What is the cause of this?
Good. Attention.
I know. She's been waiting for this. I know she has.
I love talking about tension. So loops on the underside of the fabric, that to me would say that your needle tension is too loose, because it's not pulling up that bobbin thread enough to meet in the center, basically. So try tightening your needle tension half increments. Go from 3 to 3.5, and then to 4, or whichever way you're going, and test and see if that helps. Otherwise, I have just filmed a tension troubleshooting video which will be on the site in a couple of weeks. But it's me talking for 10 minutes about tension problems and all of the different things that you can do to help alleviate those, which include change your needle. So if you have a dull needle, that's a big tension no-no. Make sure you have the right bobbin height and circumference for your machine. Make sure your machine is clean. Make sure you're using the right needle for your thread. So if you're using a heavyweight thread or a thicker thread, you need a needle with a larger eye. So it's not putting too much tension on the thread as it's going through the thread path. And yeah, that's the major points.
Perfect. Okay, and of course check that out too if you want to have more tension issues. But so aside from tension, like I said, if you watched this from the beginning, you know that Nicki loves to talk about tension, but she also has something else that she has a liking of, and that is what's sitting in front of us here is some tissue paper. So first off, explain what you normally use tissue paper for and why you like it, and then you can tell us why you might never be using tissue paper again.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I do love my tissue paper. And unfortunately, I only have white tissue paper. Ashley told me to bring pretty tissue paper.
I did want something a little more festive, but that's okay.
Boring white, because they make it in fun prints and everything to gift wrap with, and I got white. But so normally I use tissue paper underneath layers of knits. When you're stitching a zigzag stitch around a knit neckline, oftentimes you will get, or a hem even, you'll get that ripply seam. And there are different things that you can do to combat that, using a walking foot, roller foot, loosening your presser foot pressure, but also tissue paper. So if you put a layer of tissue paper under your knit fabric, it provides enough stabilization for the fabric that it doesn't really get stretched out as much, so it can help combat that. And then just tear it off of the wrong side of the seam, and you're done.
Okay.
But also tissue paper can be used for a myriad of other uses. If you have fabric like a velvet fabric, where when you're sewing it with right side against right side, you get a lot of creeping. So it shifts a lot together, and then at the end of your seam, one layer is way longer than the other. That's called creeping, and you don't want that. So to combat that, I would put a layer of tissue paper in between my velvet layers, so that instead of getting nap on nap, you have a layer of something solid in between to give it something to kind of stick against, so there's not so much shifting. So, and with knit fabrics, you get a lot of creeping sometimes as well, so you can put a layer of tissue paper in between your knit layers as well to eliminate the creeping on that fabric as well.
Okay. So that's usually why you're using tissue paper. What is your fun new find?
My new thing that I'm all about now is this knit stay tape. So this is, the brand is So Keezy by Emma Seabrook, and this is, she calls it more than extremely fine. So she has extremely fine and more than extremely fine. So this is, the knit stay tape stretches, so it's got a little bit of stretch to it. So I use it around necklines and around armholes on my knit garments, and it stabilizes the fabric just enough to eliminate that rippling in the seam. And the more than extremely fine kind is just, it's like air, it's like nothing. It doesn't add any stiffness or body, so you still get a nice drape, but it adds enough stabilization to keep everything from stretching out of whack when you're handling it and then when you're sewing it. Because when you cut a curve on a knit, you're getting near the bias on the curve, and the bias is kind of hard to work with. It's kind of slippery, and it'll stretch out of place, especially if you're using a really slinky knit like a rayon blend knit. So yeah, I use this on all of my knit necklines, and you can use it, put it in your hem allowance as well, so that if you're using a zigzag stitch or double needle stitch on your hemline, on a fine knit, you won't get those ripply seams there as well. And she does woven stay tapes, and this is fusible. So you can just use steam on your iron and fuse it right to your fabric. And she does it in different widths. So yeah, that's my new thing I'm going to be talking about for the rest of my life.
Okay, well, so I feel like since this is your new thing, and this might be one of the last pieces of tissue paper I ever hear about, I need you to sign this, and I'm going to keep it forever in my sewing room as a ceremonial, like, Nicki's piece of tissue paper. So we are putting the tissue paper to rest, and I get to keep this now. Thank you.
This is for you.
Thank you. All right, our next question here. I am new to sewing, and I'm a little scared to start, so what is an easy beginner project to ease into?
Okay. To ease into sewing, don't be scared. Just every little bit that you do is going to, you'll get more confident, and you'll get to know your machine and know, the combinations of fabric and thread and needles and everything. Yes. And I like to talk about what's the right needle to use with what fabric and what's the right thread to use with the needle. But if you just get a universal needle, an all-purpose thread, and some woven cotton fabric, you can do a whole pile of things, and it's going to turn out beautifully. So, yes, a nice stable woven fabric is a great place to start. You don't want to jump in with like corduroy or a slinky knit, because that takes a little bit more, a little more consideration. But like a nice quilting cotton, you can make. I've made a little scarf out of quilting cotton. You can do little tote bags, box the corners of a tote bag.
Even some of those fun projects you're talking about for kids, too.
Yeah, like a pillowcase. It's a, straight seams. Straight seams are a great place to start, just to get to know your machine, like I said, and then you can start going up to other fabrics and closures and garments and things like that. But some simple like patterns too, like just a elastic waistband skirt or something is easy, because that's just rectangles, and add some elastic to the waistband to kind of add that to your sewing repertoire, and then you can build from there.
Yes, and there's all different kinds of elastic, and I think you even did something earlier today with a certain type of elastic too, right? So what are some of the different types of elastic, and where do you use them?
So earlier today I did a video on elastic thread, so how to use elastic thread to make a shirred waistband, so look for that on nationalsewingcircle.com. So that is fun to use in your bobbin to create gathers. But elastic comes in all different widths. Oh, I did fold over elastic. Was that what you were talking about?
Well, elastic and you did multiple types of elastic.
I did.
So I was going to bring it up later too.
Yes. So I did fold over elastic and how to bind the raw edges of a knit tank top with fold over elastic. So that is a fun way to bind your edges. And that comes in a whole bunch of different colors and widths and stuff. But elastic, if you're doing like a casing on an elastic skirt, you can just tunnel some 1/2 inch to 1 inch wide elastic through. Or you can do like an exposed waistband skirt, because elastic, will come in 2, 3, 4 inch widths that you can use as the waistband. Just stitch it directly to the skirt using a zigzag stitch and stretch that. Stretch the elastic to match your fabric edge, and that will gather the fabric into the elastic enough to get the stretch that you need to pull it up over your hips in order to wear it. So a lot of different applications for elastic. I did last time, a couple times ago, I did, it was a long class, wasn't it?
On skirts. You had one on skirts too, and things.
It was intermediate sewing techniques or something, and I did a whole section on elastic and how to, different ways to use elastic in a waistband. So that's on the site
as well. That is available now, in the shop. And just because you talked about using exposed elastic as waistbands, like I'm pretty sure the first time I ever used elastic, it only came in white, black, maybe off-white, but nowadays you can find it in so many colors, prints. Metallic. I mean, so definitely something that's worthy of like exposing it on a waistband. So don't think you have to stick to boring colors. There's definitely something out there that'll match with whatever fabric you have. All right, our next question here, do either of you ladies have a favorite brand of sewing machine, or do you have different machines you prefer for different projects?
Yes, so Ashley, you have a whole pile of machines that you have sewn on. I have to say, I have a Hough Passport 2.0 at home, and in the studio today we've been sewing on a Hough Performance Icon, which I love, but that Passport 2.0, like, I don't know how I lived without it. It's so great. It's got the integrated dual feed foot, which is like a built-in walking foot, which is great for when you're sewing on knits to keep it from creeping. So that's probably got to be my favorite. But I mean, everyone you talk to, the machine that they have and that they have sewn on for many years is their favorite, and what they're going to say is the best. But what would you say?
Well, I'm going to go the whole run of it real quick, because I mean, I learned to sew on a Singer. My mom had a Singer, and then the first machine I ever bought, which I still have it, is a Brother machine. I have a Baby Lock machine that I've used. I have a Viking machine that I've used, but my current one, we've talked about it. We call it my Cadillac of machines. Is the new Viking Epic 980Q, which is like, the machine is smarter than me. Like, it does everything. It's got the same like integrated dual feed like you were talking about. It has a deluxe sensor system, so you just start sewing and it can sense how much pressure your presser foot needs. Like, if you're going from a thin fabric to a thick fabric, it automatically adjusts. Like, it literally does everything. So it's one of those where I feel like the first machine I ever learned on, I think, did a straight stitch and maybe a zigzag stitch, and now this one has, I mean, like 1,000 stitches. So while that's my favorite one, you don't have to have that. Like, you can do pretty much any sewing on a straight stitch machine or just a simple straight and zigzag stitch machine. So,
and I think the first machine I ever had also was a Brother, and it was like their very lowest, cheapest one, because I was a college student.
Me too.
And it did everything I needed. It had a couple of decorative stitches, a couple of buttonhole stitches. So you definitely, if you're getting into sewing, you don't have to make this huge investment.
No.
You can buy a $80 machine or something, and you can do all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah.
And then if you decide you want to stick with it and you want to grow, then you can, take it a step up if you need to.
Yep, absolutely. Mine, same thing. I think I've even said this before. I bought mine for, I think it was about $75 at a Walmart in Alaska in college. So it's like, that was just, I went there. That was the only machine they have. And I mean, I still have it. It still runs perfectly. And when my son gets a little older, that's probably a machine he'll get to play on. So it's like definitely a good one to teach on too. Those ones where they're not going to mess anything up. There is no fancy buttons and touch screens. It's just sew.
Yep, exactly.
Perfect. All right, next one here. How do I keep my fabric from puckering when sewing?
Okay, so puckering, it could be a tension issue. So you can play with the tension dial a little bit, loosen your tension, I would say. If there's puckering, loosen your tension a little bit. Another thing about tension is if you wind your bobbin at a super high speed and you're using an all-purpose or polyester thread, that can add extra tension to the bobbin thread that would then relax in the seam and cause puckers. So those are two things to check. If there's ever a tension issue, I always say change your needle too, because that can always help. Make sure you're not using a thread that is too heavy for your fabric. So if you're sewing on like a really lightweight silk organza, even if it's like a really silky kind of rayon, use a lighter weight thread, I would say. So don't use 100% cotton thread, because that has kind of a loft to it.
Right.
So I would say either use, they do make rayon thread, I believe, which kind of has a sheen to it. It's great for embroidery. A rayon thread or like a silk thread, or some thread companies make a thread and they just call it fine thread.
Or I've heard of viscose thread. Have you heard of viscose?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, that's a kind of a thin, very fine thread. So yeah, make sure if you're using something like that, even like a satin fabric, a nice thin thread. And microtex needle is great for thin, lightweight fabrics like that, because it makes just a very small puncture in your fabric, and that can help keep everything in your seam nice and smooth.
Yep, perfect. All right, next one here. Geraldine says, I have only ever sewn, but I'm interested in trying quilting. Is it difficult to start?
Ashley?
It is not. There's another thing that I don't find it difficult at all, because to me, quilting, especially the basics of quilting, is just basics of sewing. You have two pieces of fabric, you're gonna put them right sides together, and you're gonna sew a straight line. You don't even have to backstitch at the beginning and end, you just have to stitch. So the only big difference is your seam allowance if you're doing garments or home deck, you're probably at 5/8 or a half, where quilting is a quarter. But I mean, they make special feet for that and everything, so you don't even have to worry about making big adjustments. You just put on a new foot and you just stitch. So to me, I think transitioning from sewing to quilting is, I think, pretty easy. So I know some other people might have a differing opinion. Mom, she thinks this too, because it's different. And I guess, you know, if you're used to always backstitching or you're making garments, the fact that you're not doing those backstitching and you're just doing this whole different seam allowance can seem totally different. But if you just think about, it's just a straight stitch.
Right. It is. But so that's like the piecing of the quilt top. Well,
Yes.
What about the actual quilting when you've got a layer of batting and then a backing layer? Like, what do you have to?
So that is a whole nother ball game, kind of, because you either are going to use your regular sewing machine and do free motion quilting, which is one thing, or you're going to switch entirely and you're going to go and get a mid or a long arm machine and you're going to long arm quilt, and then that's a whole different movement. So it's like if you're using your regular sewing machine, and you can do this now even with just layer a couple pieces together. It doesn't have to be a quilt block or a quilt, just sandwich a few together and drop your feed dogs and just free motion quilt. So all that means is that you're moving it, like as soon as your feed dogs go down, nothing's pulling your fabric, so you can just
You drive it around.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I feel like that's a part that makes the quilting part hard, because you're so used to, if I hit my presser foot and I go, my machine is going to move my fabric.
Right.
Whereas free motion quilting, you kind of have to do it yourself. So I definitely, the first couple times that I did free motion quilting, my stitches were like this long, because you just like, you think you have to move it more than you need to,
Right.
and you end up going too fast. So you just got to kind of get a feel for it, and then it'll be no problem at all.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
like with anything, when you're learning anything, baby steps, and then
Yeah.
it gets more comfortable to you. I definitely need to start quilting.
Well, and I know
sometime.
you have quilters in your family. You've mentioned this
Yes,
before.
yeah.
You have, some teachers that live down the road, I
Yeah,
think.
my mother-in-law. I'm gonna have to ask Karen to
Yep.
give me a couple of
Quilt lessons.
quilt lessons for sure.
Perfect. Awesome. All right, our next one here. What is the best stabilizer to use if I want to add small blocks of embroidery in the strips of a crib quilt that I plan to hand quilt?
Okay, so stabilizer for embroidery.
Yes.
So there are a lot of different types of stabilizer when you're embroidering, and you want to match the stabilizer weight to the fabric weight that you're embroidering on. So if you're embroidering on really lightweight kind of fabric, you want to do probably the water-soluble stabilizer, which comes in a film variety and a cloth-like variety. That's a really lightweight stabilizer that you hoop. Do you hoop the? I haven't embroidered in a really long time.
So I always hoop a background fabric,
Right.
and then I usually will try and float the stabilizer, because I feel like, especially with a lightweight stabilizer, I accidentally pull it on there too much, and you just kind of see it start to pull apart a little bit. So if it's a super lightweight stabilizer, I'm probably just going to float it.
Float it over the top.
And then put my, either float it over the top of the fabric that you're putting it on, or if you want to put the stabilizer under the fabric, I hoop the background fabric, put the stabilizer, put the top fabric, and then pin to my hooped background fabric, so it still is holding everything
Okay.
nice
I see.
and
Right.
everything is still held. At least one thing has to be hooped. So
Right.
pick whichever is your most stable thing.
And hoop that.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, so stabilizer comes in a heat removable variety as well, which is a film variety, and that's good for a topper too. Like if you're embroidering on terry cloth or something,
Yeah.
that helps keep your threads from sinking down into that pile. And then there's the cutaway stabilizer, which is thicker and heavier, and that stays under the threads of
Yes.
the embroidery design, and you just cut it away from the perimeter. So for this question, I would say water soluble. That's oh, there's tearaway too. Tearaway is kind of in between cutaway and water soluble in terms of thickness. And that's the one that I would always use, because I would always embroider on like stable woven cotton fabrics,
Right.
and that tearaway stabilizer is just the right weight, and then you just tear it away from the perimeter and it stays under the threads to give it stability, and it's just a good like mid-range stabilizer.
So yeah, so use your tearaway, or just because the second part of this was that she plans to hand quilt it. So if you are finding that hand quilting through that extra layer, because that tearaway you can only remove from the outer edges. So if like you're just don't want to have to stitch through that extra layer, then use the removable.
Right, like water soluble kind.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Sherry wants to know, what are your favorite kinds of pins to use for garment sewing?
For pins, I use just like a regular glass head pin. And I don't have, I've been wearing my wrist pin cushion all day long, and now I just took it off. But yeah, I've got 80,000 pins floating around my sewing room, and they're that kind of mid-gauge glass head pin, so that if I happen to iron over them, it's not going to melt. It's not like a plastic head. But as far as pins go, if, like, I don't sew over pins, but if I happen to bend a pin somehow, that pin is going straight in the garbage. I can't stand bent pins. So just sharp, nice sharp pins. If a pin ever snags my fabric, it's going in the garbage as well. So you don't want snags and runs in your fabric. So get rid of those nasty pins and keep your pins sharp.
This is one of the areas where we differ, because I use the extra fine silk pins, which bend super easily. Sometimes if I'm even trying to put them in through a fabric that's a little bit too stiff for them, they'll bend a little bit, but then you can straighten them back out. But I mean, in my pin cushion would drive you crazy then, because like at least every third pin you pull out has like a little bend in it, and I just like straighten it out and put it back in. Or sometimes I'll still use it. It still holds them together. So
different strokes for different folks.
Exactly. Yes. Whatever you can make work. Yeah. All right. Tracy wants to know, when fitting pants to men or women, what is the measurement needed to prevent wrinkles below the waist?
Wrinkles below the waist. I'm having a hard time picturing what wrinkles below the waist would mean. So like the inseam that you...
Or I'm just picturing, sometimes when, if I put on a pair of pants, I'm thinking more of like slacks or whatever, right? And I put on a pair of pants and it fits around the waist, but I have bigger hips, so it pulls to the hips, and I end up with these like puckers or wrinkle lines, going from like the waist down. So I don't know if there's like, where do you adjust fit to make the pants not have those wrinkles but not seem just like baggy?
Right. So pants is something that I don't sew a lot of. So I would say probably where you're getting like pull lines, you want to figure out where that fabric is pulling and where you need more room. And you can add to the side seam in those places to give yourself more room, and then taper it back into the waist. Or if that angle gets to be too much, you might want to cut the whole thing wider and then add a dart in the waistband. That could also work to give you more space in the hips so you don't have pull lines.
Yes.
So
I'm all about darts too, because then you have like an intentional crease or fold, and it will make any other little extra fold that you just can't get rid of, it'll make it seem like it almost fits in.
To be there.
Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of pleats.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, our next one here. Some pillowcases for me are confusing because they have many pieces and it's supposed to be a beginner project. So what would be explain what maybe some of the other pieces to a pillowcase might be, and how to simplify that and make it just two pieces.
So pillowcases sometimes have that band on the open edge, or they'll have like an envelope back sometimes. So if you want to make a super simple, straightforward pillowcase, cut 2 rectangles, and hem, I guess you would stitch the 3 seams first, turn it right side out, and then you would hem that final raw edge. And as long as it's a bag that fits your pillow, it's a pillowcase.
Yeah, exactly. So a hem, what's the simplest hem that you would use?
Double turn hem. Just fold it under twice, 1/2 inch. And very easy, simple. Finish your seam allowances on the inside. You want to clip your corners because you're turning that square corner right side out. So clip across your corner. Finish your seam allowances. You can zigzag those seam allowances together. That would probably be the fastest way. And then double fold the last raw edge, and you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next one here. If you don't have a serger or an overlock machine, what kind of stitch would create the same effect?
So I do have a serger, but I don't use it a lot because I'm used to using my sewing machine, I guess. So to mimic that overlock effect, a lot of sewing machines have overlock stitches. So check your stitch directory in your machine manual or wherever on your machine your stitches are stored.
Yeah.
And you can find out how many overlock stitches you have. Oh, good. You're going to give us a visual.
Yes, I'm going to try to here. So this is what it looks like on my machine, and this is the #1 overlock stitch that I always go to, and yours will probably look something similar to this in that it has to have a straight line. Then it can either be zigzag stitches or a diamond, but essentially this is what is going to be, this is the raw edge of your fabric over here. So it has an anchor stitch, then your diamonds or your zigzag are going over that edge, encasing the edge and finishing it, coming back, continuing that straight stitch. So if you have something that looks like this, pick that.
Nice.
Try that out.
Now, does that stitch have stretch to it then?
No.
No,
because
okay.
it has that straight.
The straight anchor
Yeah.
stitch.
So there are ones on my machine. I haven't played around with them as much because I mentioned there's about 1,000 on there. There is a way to do sort of a stretch overlock stitch. It just won't look like this one. So this is more of one that I would use on that pillowcase we were just talking about, on a woven fabric, because
that doesn't need stretch in the seam, but it goes over that raw edge to encase, so it doesn't fray.
Yeah,
okay, cool.
Absolutely. All right, our next one here. JC wants to know, I have a 5-year-old nephew. Can I teach him sewing? Do I do hand sewing, or is there something else?
Yes, so 5, I think, I mean, it all depends on the 5-year-old, of course, but I think that's a good age to start. And you can start teaching them hand sewing, just use a nice big like tapestry needle, and quilting cotton is a nice stable fabric that they can stitch through. They can hand stitch a pillowcase, just a nice straight running stitch. Or you can start teaching them on a sewing machine. A simple machine like a Brother machine is easy to teach on and to learn on. But make sure you supervise heavily because obviously the needle is very dangerous. So you can start by having them press the foot pedal for you, or just give them one job, but make sure they respect the danger of it.
Right.
And you can teach them, how it works, how you thread it, and get them started that way. But I know my daughter's super excited to help pick out fabric, so that is. Make sure you include them in that step because that makes them really excited to stitch the thing and excited about every step of the process when it's a really fun dinosaur print or whatever.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And we do have a fun video on the site that one of our instructors, Jessica, did for us years ago on sewing with little kids. And they were maybe a little bit older than 5, but they were just getting into a machine and really wanted to learn about doing straight stitches, but turning corners and changing directions. And so she printed off just a very simple maze, and they got to figure their way through the maze by stitching. So you get to learn straight stitching, you get to learn keeping your needle down, raise the presser foot, pivot. So that's kind of a fun little thing too, is like stitching through this little maze. So if they're getting a little bit more advanced in the using the sewing machine and they want to try out something more, that could be a fun.
Yeah.
Or if you're bored and you need
that's a fun
stitch
activity.
A maze.
That sounds cool.
Absolutely. All right, our next one here. Elizabeth is wondering if you could repeat the name of the knit stabilizer again.
Yes. So this is So Keys E. She lives in the Florida Keys, so it's So Keys E. It's Emma Seabrook. She has all kinds of different varieties, woven, different weights, and different widths.
Yes.
So Keys E by Emma Seabrook. It is sold on Amazon, but she also has her website is emmaseabrook.com.
Perfect.
And she sells all of her stuff there too.
Yeah.
And it's free shipping from her site.
Perfect. All right, our next one here, Shelly says, what would be a good first project for using a serger for a beginner?
A serger. So any project that you can do on the sewing machine, basically you can do on the serger. So pillowcases, you can do that on the serger. It overlocks your seam allowance as you go, so there's no need to go back in and finish your seam allowances as if you were doing it with a regular sewing machine. So intro to the serger, straight lines are good as well, just like if you were just starting to learn sewing. Straight lines, just to figure out the mechanics of the serger.
Yep.
So yeah, pillowcase, scarves, tote bags, anything that's got just straight lines and a nice stable fabric.
Yes, and we do have a fun video, a National Sewing Circle. Actually, one of our other instructors, EJ, did one where it's actually just, she's making cloth napkins for a dinner party or something, but so it seems super simple because it's literally a square of fabric and you're just finishing the edges, but you actually learn a lot of good serger techniques because you're learning how to start, how to turn a corner with the serger, which can be a little bit trickier than on a machine, and then how to go around the perimeter of that square and join the edges, because you do have to kind of do something to finish off those serger stitches. Right. So something as simple as a cloth napkin can really teach you 3 main serger steps. So that's a good video to check out as well.
Very cool.
All right, our next one here. Somebody commented they have used a serger and still don't even know how to use it. So sergers can be tricky, but just keep practicing.
They can be a little complex and a little intimidating, but yeah, you've got to be very careful when you're threading it because everything has to match up just right. But yeah, it takes practice.
Yes. All right, Julie wants to know, for free motion, do you prefer to use the foot pedal or pedal free? I'm going to say foot pedal. I've never done it pedal free, but I've never really had a machine that does that.
Right.
So I don't.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
I would always use the foot pedal.
As well. Yeah. All right. Our next question here, Anya says she has a quick question about how to keep her sewing supplies in good working order, and also what is the best way to go about sharpening a seam ripper?
Ooh. So keeping your sewing machine and
sewing supplies
in good working order. So this is actually something I wanted to mention from the first question about the spool of thread.
Yes.
So how do you keep your spools of thread from going bad with age and getting brittle? You want to keep your thread out of direct sunlight because the UV rays will not only bleach them, but also weaken the fibers and make them more prone to shredding and breakage. And also keep them out of humidity. So don't store them in the basement, away from sunlight in a cool, dry spot, basically. And that is good advice for everything, actually. You don't want to leave your sewing machine somewhere that's damp because it can either rust things or just, it's just not good for it. It's not good for it.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's a good tip. And then, what was the second part?
Best way to go about sharpening a seam ripper.
Sharpening a seam ripper. I've never tried that.
Okay.
I know I filmed a tip on how to sharpen your scissors and your rotary cutter.
Yes. Tell us those real quick, and then we'll talk about.
Okay, so that was with tin foil. So it's just like a quick fix. Fold a piece of tin foil in half 3 or 4 times so you get a little bit of a thickness, and then just snip 3 or 4 times on the end with your scissors, and then with your rotary cutter you would just roll, making sure it rolls around the whole circumference of the rotary cutter. Roll 3 or 4 times, and that'll be enough to just be a little quick fix, sharpen it up a little bit. If it was dull enough to be annoying and you don't have time to go to the store right then, quick fix.
Perfect. So seam rippers, so I have to say we do even, I believe, have an article about this on how to sharpen your seam ripper, and it's something that I know you can do, but I've never done before because I'll be honest, I either don't use it or I've lost it and I just get a new one. But the 2 main ways to do that is you're going to use either some steel wool and use the same effect as the tin foil. You're just kind of rubbing it on there and sort of roughening or re-straightening that edge. And then the other way to do it is with a bead reamer. So a bead reamer is like a little pointed, sharp awl-looking tool that you would normally, if you have a bead that the center wasn't punched out of, that's what you can re-punch the center out. So it kind of has like this edge to it that you can run along. If this is your seam ripper, right, you can kind of run it along this edge, and you're just sort of trying to straighten that edge back out, and that's going to sort of sharpen it in effect. But those are still, like you've mentioned, kind of like quick fixes.
Right.
They aren't necessarily long-term solutions, but they will definitely get you through your project, and then you can get some new tools at the end.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here, answering all of our sewing questions, and for being physically here in the same room for the first time ever.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to be here, and as always, a pleasure to hang out and talk about sewing with everybody who has questions.
Absolutely.